The silence inside the first-class cabin of Flight 492 felt heavy. Only the low hum of the plane and the fast tapping of dozens of phones could be heard as passengers secretly recorded what was happening. Captain Richard Sterling stood near seat 1A, looking down with clear anger. He had over 20 years of flying experience and an ego just as large as the aircraft he commanded. His fingers shook as he pointed at a man in a hoodie, a man he had loudly said did not deserve to sit among his VIP passengers. Sterling believed he was removing a problem. He thought he was protecting his flight. What he did not know was that the man in seat 1 represented the very authority that controlled his career. He had no idea this passenger was the person who approved pilot licenses. Within minutes, Sterling's world was about to collapse, not with noise or chaos, but with official consequences. Outside at JFK Airport, rain poured nonstop. Thick sheets of water slammed the runway, turning everything beyond Terminal 4 into a gray blur. Inside the cockpit of the Boeing 777, Captain Sterling checked his watch again. The flight was already 40 minutes late, and his patience was running thin. Richard came from a long line of pilots. His father flew commercial planes, and his grandfather flew military aircraft. He carried himself like a leader with sharp looks and strict discipline. To him, the cockpit was not just a workplace. It was his kingdom. He ruled it with extreme control and expected absolute perfection. Fuel load is confirmed, Captain, said the first officer, Timothy, speaking carefully. Timothy was young, skilled, and clearly nervous around Richard. Took long enough. Richard snapped while fixing his uniform. What about the passenger list? I saw the VIP names. We have a senator and a tech CEO on board, Timothy replied. Good, Richard said. I want a smooth flight. No delays, no problems, and no questionable people in first class. My seniority review is next month. Everything must be perfect. Timothy nodded. Boarding is almost done. We're just waiting for the passenger. In seat 1A, Richard frowned. Seat 1A was the most important seat, usually saved for powerful people. Who is it? Timothy checked the tablet. Marcus Hayes, no title listed. Last-minute ticket, paid in cash. Richard scoffed. Cash purchase? Probably someone who doesn't belong. Watch him closely. He left the cockpit for his usual final cabin inspection. He wanted first class to look flawless. As he walked through the aisle, he smiled at the senator enjoying a drink. Smooth flight today, Senator, Richard said confidently. That's good to hear, the senator replied. Then Richard saw the late passenger. The man entering the cabin did not look like a politician or a CEO. He was a tall black man wearing a dark hoodie, relaxed pants, and large headphones around his neck. He carried an old leather bag that looked well used. He moved calmly, without drawing attention, and sat down in seat 1 with ease. Richard froze. The sight annoyed him deeply. This was first class, a place meant for power and status. The man's casual clothing stood out sharply among expensive suits and champagne glasses. Richard immediately called over Sarah, the lead flight attendant, who knew his temper well. Who was that man in 1A? Richard asked sharply. That's Mr. Hayes, Sarah replied. He boarded late. He looks out of place, Richard said. He's making the VIPs uncomfortable. Sarah glanced back. The senator was calmly reading his newspaper. Everyone seems fine, Captain. His ticket is valid. It's about standards, Richard insisted. We sell an image. People pay a lot to sit here, away from chaos. That man looks suspicious. Sarah raised an eyebrow. He's just sitting there. He paid cash and bought the ticket last minute, Richard said, convincing himself. Check his boarding pass again. Verify his ID. Sarah hesitated, but she knew arguing was useless. She approached Marcus, who was quietly watching the rain outside. He turned toward her, calm and alert. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly, "may I please see your boarding pass again?" Marcus studied her for a moment, then handed it over without protest. The boarding pass was valid. Seat 1A, platinum status. Everything checked out. "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. "Would you like something to drink?" "Water, no ice." Marcus replied. Sarah returned to Richard. "He's legitimate. Platinum member." Richard's face tightened. He hated being wrong. Worse, he hated how relaxed Marcus looked, as if he belonged there. It stirred something dark inside him. Platinum could be a system mistake, Richard muttered. "I'm calling the gate to check his background." "We're already delayed," Sarah warned. "I'm responsible for this flight," Richard snapped. "If I say he's a problem, he's removed." The plane doors were closed. Seatbelt signs were on. But the aircraft did not move. In seat 1A, Marcus calmly sipped his water. He pulled out a small notebook and wrote the time. 10:42 a.m. Pushback delayed. He looked toward the stressed crew near the cockpit and added another note. Marcus Hayes was not just a passenger. And Captain Sterling had no idea what was coming next. Marcus Hayes was not an ordinary traveler. He was the newly appointed Director of Field Operations for the FAA, reporting directly to headquarters in Washington. This flight was part of secret audit, an unannounced inspection of airline behavior, en routes with past complaints. The New York to London route had already received 3 reports in 6 months, all pointing to unprofessional conduct by the same captain. Marcus had hoped those complaints were exaggerated. He had hoped this would be a quiet, boring flight. That hope ended instantly. The cockpit door suddenly opened, and Captain Richard Sterling stormed out. He did not walk like a calm pilot. He walked like a nightclub enforcer. His cap was missing, his face tight with anger, and his steps heavy. He marched straight toward seat 1A. The cabin fell silent. The senator lowered his newspaper. The tech executive removed her headphones. Richard stopped directly over Marcus, blocking the light above him. "Sir," Richard said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. This was not a polite request. It was a command. Marcus calmly capped his pen and looked up. His face showed no fear. "Yes, Captain." "I need to see your identification now," Richard demanded. Marcus stayed seated. "I already showed my boarding pass and ID at the gate, and again to your flight attendant. Is there a problem?" Richard leaned closer, invading his space. "The problem is that you are violating our dress and conduct standards for first class." A quiet murmur spread through the cabin. A dress code? In a time when people flew in pajamas? Marcus raised an eyebrow. "My hoodie is cashmere, and I haven't spoken to anyone." "How is my behavior a problem?" "You're making other passengers uncomfortable," Richard said smoothly, waving a hand behind him. "We have VIPs on board. Your appearance and attitude do not belong here." Marcus's voice grew lower and steadier. "And what exactly are you deciding?" "I'm moving you," Richard said, pointing toward the back of the plane. "I have a seat in economy comfort. You'll fit in better there. Grab your bag." This was not about seating. It was a test. Richard wanted Marcus to react. He wanted anger. He wanted a reason to remove him completely. But Marcus did not shout. He did not argue. He did not move. He looked at Richard with quiet disappointment. "Captain," Marcus said calmly, "I paid full fare for this seat. I am not moving. I suggest you return to the cockpit and prepare for departure. You are already 45 minutes late." Richard's face flushed deep red. Everyone was watching now. If he backed down, he would look weak. "Listen to me, boy," Richard snapped, the insult sharp and unmistakable. "I am the captain of this aircraft. My word is law. You do not belong here. You can walk to the back or I will have police remove you in handcuffs. Choose." Sarah stepped forward, horrified. "Captain, please." "Quiet," Richard barked without looking at her. "Well, what's it going to be?" Marcus sighed. It was slow and tired, like someone who had seen this before. He reached into his pocket. Richard jumped back. "Hands where I can see them," Richard shouted. Marcus moved carefully. He did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and placed it face up on the armrest. "Call them," Marcus said calmly. "What?" Richard sneered. "Call law enforcement," Marcus replied. "Call airport security. Call the duty manager too. Because if I leave this seat, Captain Sterling, this plane will not fly today, and you will never pilot a commercial aircraft again." Richard laughed loudly. "Is that a threat? You think you have power? You're nobody." He grabbed the galley phone and dialed the gate. "You have Port Authority on the jet bridge now," he shouted. "I have a disruptive passenger and one refusing a direct order." He slammed the phone down and smiled at Marcus. "You wanted this. You got it." Marcus said nothing. He opened his notebook and wrote, **10:55 a.m. Captain invoking authority. To remove passenger based on bias. Situation escalating. He closed the notebook and waited. Minutes later, heavy boots hit the jet bridge. The sound echoed through the aircraft. This was no quiet arrival. In the cockpit, Richard adjusted his tie and checked his reflection. He looked proud, confident, certain he was in control. "Watch closely, Tim," he said smugly. "This is how you protect your aircraft." Timothy did not smile. His stomach twisted. "Did he threaten you, Captain?" "Insubordination is a threat," Richard replied coldly. The cabin door opened. Two large Port Authority officers entered first class. Their presence filled the narrow space. "Where's the issue?" asked Sergeant Miller. Richard pointed sharply. "At seat 1A. That passenger refused my order. He's hostile and a safety risk. Remove him immediately." Sergeant Miller looked at Marcus. Marcus sat calmly, hands folded, silent amid the tension. "Sir," the sergeant said, stepping closer, "you'll need to collect your belongings and come with us." The cabin was frozen. The senator watched closely. The CEO discreetly recorded the moment. Marcus stood slowly. He was taller than both officers. Taller than Richard. "I am complying," Marcus said calmly. "I am leaving because I don't want to delay these passengers any further than Captain Sterling already has." "Just take your bag," Richard snapped. Marcus removed his worn duffel from the overhead bin and placed it on his shoulder. He turned to face Richard. They stood only feet apart, yet worlds away. "Captain Sterling," Marcus said quietly, lowering his voice so only Richard and the officers could hear. "You have just used federal authority to remove a passenger you personally judged as a risk," Marcus said calmly. "That is a very serious power to use." "I know the law," Richard snapped. "Now get off my plane." "I'm leaving," Marcus replied. He reached into his hoodie pocket. "Don't," Sergeant Miller warned, stepping forward. Marcus paused, then slowly pulled out a business card. He did not hand it to Richard. He gently placed it on the empty seat of 1A. "You're going to need a lawyer, Richard," Marcus said quietly, using the captain's first name. The familiarity made Richard uncomfortable. "And you'll need a very strong union representative. Because the moment I step off this aircraft, the clock starts on your career." "Get him out of here," Richard shouted. "He's threatening me again." Sergeant Miller grabbed Marcus by the arm. "Let's go, sir. Now." Marcus did not resist. He allowed the officers to escort him down the aisle. This walk was usually filled with shame, when passengers were judged as drunks or criminals. But Marcus held his head high. He made eye contact with people as he passed. He paused briefly near the senator. "My apologies for the delay, Senator," Marcus said calmly. "A shame," the senator replied, clearly confused. This man didn't act like anyone he had ever seen removed from a plane. Marcus stepped off the aircraft and into the jet bridge. The warm air hit his face as the officers stayed close beside him. "Am I under arrest?" Marcus asked. "Not yet," Sergeant Miller replied. "But the airline may press charges. We need to take you for processing." "That won't be necessary," Marcus said. "You can escort me to the terminal. I need to make a phone call." Back on the plane, Richard watched the hoodie disappear. A surge of power rushed through him. He felt victorious. He had removed the problem. He clapped his hands once and faced the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the disruption. We do not tolerate behavior that threatens the safety or comfort of our VIP guests. We'll be departing shortly. Champagne will be served." His smile returned, but the cabin felt cold. Passengers shifted in their seats. No one applauded. Richard didn't care. He returned to the cockpit and shut the reinforced door. "Door locked," he said confidently. "Let's get airborne." Timothy hesitated. "Captain." The business card he left. "Throw it away," Richard said, flipping switches. "I don't care who he thinks he is." Timothy reached back and picked up the card before it was cleared. He glanced at it. The card was thick, cream-colored, with gold lettering. A seal sat in the center. Asterisk, asterisk, Department of Transportation. Asterisk, 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 Federal Aviation Administration. Asterisk, asterisk, Marcus Hayes. Executive Director, Field Operations and Safety Compliance. Timothy's hands began to shake. Double quotes, "Captain." "Not now," Richard snapped. "Call for pushback." Richard didn't see Marcus Hayes standing inside the terminal. Phone pressed to his ear, staring directly at the aircraft. The pushback tractor lifted the nose gear. Flight 492 slowly moved away from the gate. Richard exhaled. This was his favorite moment. The aircraft responded to him. The rain streaked the windshield, but he felt calm. In his mind, he was unstoppable. "Tower, Flight 492 requesting taxi," Timothy said quietly. There was a pause. "Flight 492, hold position," came the reply. The voice was sharp, not routine. "Holding," Timothy said. "They're backed." "Up," Richard scoffed. "Call again. We're burning fuel." Minutes passed. The plane sat still. Richard tapped the controls impatiently. "Tower, requesting update," Timothy said. Silence. Then a new voice cut in. It was deeper, stronger. "Flight 492. This is the tower supervisor. Do not move. Shut down engines immediately." Richard frowned. Shut down engines? That order meant something was seriously wrong. "This is Captain Sterling," Richard said sharply. "We are fully operational. Why are we shutting down?" "Captain Sterling, shut down now. You are ordered to return to the gate." Richard slammed his hand down. "This is ridiculous." He cut the engines. The powerful hum faded into silence. Lights flickered as the aircraft lost main power. "Sarah," Richard said over the intercom, "prepare the cabin. We're returning to the gate." The plane was slowly pushed back toward the terminal. Richard fumed. He planned lawsuits. He planned revenge. He swore the passenger would never fly again. The aircraft stopped at gate B42. "I'm going to speak to security," Richard said, standing up. "They should have arrested him." "Captain," Timothy whispered. He was holding the card, pale and shaking. "You need to see this." "I don't want his trash," Richard snapped. "Look at it," Timothy said loudly. Richard grabbed the card and read it. "Marcus Hayes, Director of Field Operations." Richard read it again. The HOODIE. The calm voice. The notebook. His stomach dropped. The man he removed was not powerless. And now the consequences had begun. That man was responsible for aviation safety across the entire country. No, Richard whispered. This is fake. A trick. He's a fraud. But deep inside him, fear settled like a heavy stone. His instincts told him the truth. Then something happened that should have been impossible. The cockpit door unlocked from the outside. Only crew members had that access. The door opened. Standing there was not Sarah. Was the airport duty manager, a man Richard knew well, and he looked terrified. Beside him stood a man in a dark suit with an earpiece, clearly federal security. And behind them, stepping onto the aircraft for the second time that day, was Marcus Hayes. The hoodie was gone. Marcus now wore a simple black t-shirt. Around his neck hung a federal badge on a lanyard pulled from his bag. It caught the cockpit lights and gleamed with authority. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not show anger. He looked like a judge about to deliver a sentence. He stepped into the cockpit. The space felt suddenly small. Richard sat frozen in his seat, the business card crushed in his sweaty hand. Captain Sterling, Marcus said. His voice was no longer calm passenger talk. It was the voice of the United States government. You can't be in here, Richard stammered. This is a sterile cockpit. Not anymore, Marcus replied. As of 2 minutes ago, this aircraft has been grounded by the FAA. Your medical certificate and pilot's license are suspended pending an emergency investigation. The air left Richard's lungs. You can't do this, he gasped. I'm the captain. You were the captain, Marcus corrected. Now, you are a liability. Marcus turned to the first officer. Officer Blair, did you agree that I was a security threat? Timothy swallowed hard. His career flashed through his mind. No, sir, he said immediately. I told him you were platinum status. I told him the manifest was clean. He ignored me. Traitor, Richard hissed. Marcus ignored him. Good. Marcus said to Timothy, you are relieved of duty for today. Go home. Then Marcus turned back to Richard and leaned forward, gripping the backs of the pilot's seats. You called me unfit, Marcus said quietly. You judged me by my clothes. You judged me by my skin. You believed you were protecting VIPs from people like me. He gestured toward the rain-streaked window. I wrote the VIP protocols for this airline. I approved the training standards. That allowed you to sit in this seat. Today, I sat in 1A to see if this airline still valued safety and respect over ego. Marcus paused, letting the silence crush Richard. You failed, he said softly. I was doing my job, Richard shouted. I have discretion. You were suspicious. I was sitting, Marcus replied. And now you're leaving. Marcus straightened. Law enforcement is waiting at the end of the jet bridge, Richard. This time, they are not there for me. They are there for you. Surrender your badge and ID immediately. Richard looked at the duty manager. You're letting this happen? I gave this airline 20 years. The duty manager stared at the floor. He's FIA, or Richard. He can ground the entire fleet. Just go. Richard Sterling unbuckled his seatbelt. His hand shook so badly he struggled with the clasp. He stood up, weak and pale, and grabbed his flight bag. He had to walk out. He had to walk through first class. The passengers watched silently as their captain passed by, stripped of confidence, escorted by the man he had insulted. The senator looked up. He met Marcus's eyes, then looked at Richard with open disgust. Unfit indeed, the senator said loudly. Richard kept his head down. On the jet bridge, Sergeant Miller waited. Mr. Sterling, the officer said, we need your airport badge. Richard handed it over. He felt empty. As he walked away from the aircraft, Marcus's voice floated back through the doorway. Sarah, I'm sorry for the delay. Could I get that water now? No ice. Richard kept walking. He knew, with sick certainty, that he would never sit in a cockpit again. 3 days later, the headquarters of Sovereign Airways loomed over downtown Dallas. Glass, steel, and silence. Careers ended inside those walls. Richard sat in a waiting room on the 40th floor, wearing his best suit. His uniform had already been taken. His company devices and badges were gone. His leg bounced nervously. Beside him sat Stan Kowalski, his union representative. Normally confident and aggressive, Stan looked grim. Stop shaking, Stan muttered. They can't fire me, Richard whispered. 20 years, clean record. I acted under captain's authority. Rick, stop, Stan snapped. You tried to remove the FAS field operations director because you didn't like his hoodie. Do you know how toxic that is? Richard swallowed. The stock dropped 4%. Stan continued. This isn't a misunderstanding. The boardroom doors opened. They're ready for you. An assistant said quietly. Richard entered. At the head of the table sat the airline's CEO. To one side sat the chief pilot, who refused to meet Richard's eyes. Lawyers filled the room, and at the far end sat Marcus Hayes. Suit. Folder. Calm. Sit down, the CEO said coldly. Stan began to speak. Gentlemen, we are here to discuss. This is not a negotiation. The chief pilot cut in. This is a notification. A paper slid across the table. As of this morning, the CEO said, your employment has been terminated for cause: gross misconduct, discrimination, abuse of authority. Richard stared at the page. You can't do this, he whispered, but it was already done. Richard jumped to his feet and shouted, I demand a hearing. I have union rights. We already went through arbitration with the union board. Rick, Stan said softly, pulling his sleeve. They waived the hearing. The union is not backing you on this. Richard stared at Stan in shock. He felt betrayed. What? He whispered. But that's the least of your problems, Stan added. Marcus Hayes spoke next. His calm, steady voice filled the room. Marcus opened his folder. Richard, he said, the FA has completed its preliminary review of this incident. We recovered the cockpit voice recorder and the cabin audio. You can't use the CVR for discipline, Richard snapped, quoting. A well-known pilot privacy rule. We're not using it for employment discipline, Marcus replied calmly. We are using it for an emergency order of revocation. Marcus slid another document across the table. It carried the seal of the Department of Transportation. The FAA is revoking your airline transport pilot license, effective immediately, Marcus said. We are also flagging your medical certificate for psychiatric review. The review concerns narcissistic behavior and anti-authority impulsivity that is incompatible with safe flight operations. The room spun around Richard.revocation. Not suspension.revocation. That meant he was no longer a pilot. He was nothing more than a pedestrian. To fly again, he would have to start from zero. Private pilot, instrument rating, commercial license, years of training. And even then, no one might ever trust him again. You're destroying my life over a hoodie, Richard whispered. I'm removing a hazard from the national airspace system, Marcus replied. I listened to the tape. Richard, I heard you call me boy. I heard you tell your first officer that you were God on that plane. Several lawyers flinched. Even the CEO looked uncomfortable. That was taken out of context, Richard stammered. It's on tape, Marcus said. But here's what truly ended your career. Marcus leaned forward. We audited your flight history, the FAA RAN pattern, analysis on your passenger removal logs. In the last 5 years, You removed 12 first-class passengers. Richard's face went pale. They all had one thing in common, Marcus continued. They were all minorities, every single one. The room fell silent. You weren't protecting VIPs, Marcus said. You were shaping the cabin to fit your personal beliefs. That violates federal civil rights law. The Department of Justice has been notified. Now it was no longer just about a job. This was about prison, civil rights violations in aviation. Were federal crimes if they interfered with commerce. I want a lawyer, Richard croaked. You have one, the CEO said, pointing at Stan. I'm a union representative, not a criminal defense attorney, Stan said, closing his notebook. Rick, you're on your own. The union can't touch a DOJ case. The CEO stood up. Richard Sterling, you are banned from all Sovereign Airways property. Security will escort you to the parking garage. If you enter any of our terminals again, you will be arrested for trespassing. Richard turned to Captain Vance. Jimmy, help me. Captain Vance didn't look up. You disgrace the wings, he said quietly. Get out. Richard stood slowly. His legs felt heavy. He looked at Marcus Hayes one last time. Marcus wasn't smiling. He looked sad. It didn't have to end like this, Marcus said. You just had to fly the plane. Richard walked out of the boardroom, a broken man. But inside the elevator, he pulled out his phone. He believed he still had one move. Left. Public opinion. He would control the story. He would go to the press. He would claim he was a victim of government overreach. He dialed the Daily Patriot, a right-wing media outlet known for controversy. Hello, Richard said, his voice shaking with anger. I'm a veteran pilot fired for refusing to bow to a corrupt FAA official. I want an interview tonight. He believed he could shape the narrative. He didn't know the internet had already destroyed it. That evening, Richard sat in his living room with a glass of scotch, waiting for the reporter to arrive. He convinced himself he was the hero. The captain who stood his ground. His wife, Ellen, walked in holding her iPad. Her face was pale. Richard, she whispered, have you seen it? Seen what? He snapped. I'm busy preparing my statement. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. It's everywhere. She turned the screen toward him. It was a vertical video. High definition. Shot from Seat 1B by the CEO of Oak Haven Tech. She had recorded everything under her tray table. The video had been uploaded 2 hours earlier. It already had 14 million views. The title was simple. Racist pilot tries to kick FAA director off plane. Instant regret. Richard watched in horror. The audio was clear. Listen to me, boy. I am the captain of this plane. My word is law. The video showed Marcus Hayes, calm and dignified. Then it cut to Richard, red-faced, yelling, spitting, out of control. Then the aftermath. Police escorting Richard off the plane. The senator saying, unfit indeed. Richard scrolled through the comments. They moved too fast to read. Did he really say, I'm God? I'm a flight attendant. This guy is known. That boy comment ended his career. The man in the hoodie is Marcus Hayes. That's the FAA, a boss. Richard threw the iPad onto the couch. It's edited, he shouted. Out of context. It's not edited, Alan said, crying. My sister saw it. The neighbors saw it. There are news vans outside. Good, Richard yelled. Let them come. I'll tell the truth. The doorbell rang. That's the reporter, Richard said, fixing his tie. He opened the door. It wasn't the reporter. It was a process server. A young guy in a baseball cap chewing gum. Richard Sterling? Yes. The kid shoved a thick stack of papers into his chest. You've been served. Serve for what? Civil lawsuit, the kid said, walking away. Class action. The 12 passengers you removed over the years. discrimination, emotional distress, defamation. Oh, and Sovereign Airways is suing you too. Richard stood frozen. In his driveway. News vans waited. Not friendly ones. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, BBC. They circled like vultures. Richard saw a reporter standing on his lawn, microphone in hand, speaking live on air. He could hear her voice clearly through the open space. Captain Sterling, now known online as the pilot of Prejudice, is facing a federal investigation and multiple lawsuits. Sources confirm his pilot license has been revoked and his pension has been frozen pending a civil rights inquiry. Pension frozen. Richard dropped the legal papers. The glass of scotch slipped from his hand and shattered. On the porch, his retirement. His savings. Everything he owned was tied to airline stock and his pension fund. If the lawsuits moved forward, if they proved he violated federal law, he would lose it all. The house, the boat, the country club membership. Gone. He rushed inside and slammed the door shut. He locked the deadbolt. Ellen. He called out. No answer. Hey. Walked into the kitchen. On the counter lay a handwritten note. I'm going to my mother's. Do not call me until this is over. You humiliated us. Richard Sterling was alone. The house was silent, except for the landline phone ringing again and again. He slid down onto the kitchen floor, surrounded by granite counters and stainless steel appliances he had bought with a captain's salary. He stared at his hands. These hands once controlled hundreds of tons of aircraft at 30,000 feet. Now, they couldn't even protect his own home. He had wanted VIP treatment. He had wanted respect. Now the world knew exactly who was, and it had decided he was unfit. 6 months passed since Flight 492 returned to the gate. The aviation world, usually, forgets yesterday's news quickly, but the Sterling incident did not fade. It grew. At FAA headquarters in Washington, D.C., the main auditorium was packed. Standing room only. Pilots, airline executives, and union leaders from every major carrier filled the room. The atmosphere was serious and respectful. On stage stood Marcus Hayes. He looked tired, but focused. Behind him, projected on a massive screen, was a new document. The Sterling Protocol, Bias Recognition and De-escalation in Command Authority. Command is not a privilege to rule, Marcus said, his voice echoing through the hall. It is a duty to serve. When personal bias overrides safety judgment, when we judge people by clothing, appearance, or skin color, we don't just fail as professionals, we fail as pilots. He clicked the remote. A photo of a hoodie appeared on the screen. Nervous. Laughter rippled through the audience. This is not a threat, Marcus said firmly. It's fabric. The real danger is ego, the kind that cannot tell the difference between a passenger and a prejudice. Marcus looked across the sea of uniforms. Effective today, every pilot in the United States will undergo mandatory recertification under this protocol. The era of the God complex in the cockpit is over. If you cannot treat every person on your manifest with dignity, you will not fly in my airspace. The applause began slowly. Then it rose into a roar, a standing ovation. Marcus Hayes had turned one ugly moment into lasting change. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Queens, New York, rain fell steadily outside JFK Terminal 4. Traffic was jammed. Horns blared. A white rattling shuttle bus with the logo Happy Stay Budget Inn pulled up to the curb. Its brakes screeched loudly. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out wearing a cheap, ill-fitting uniform. His name tag read simply, Rick. It was Richard Sterling. His hair was thin and gray. His sharp jawline was gone, replaced by the soft face of stress and regret. 6 months of cheap beer and sleepless nights had taken their toll. He walked to the back of the bus and began unloading luggage. "Hey, driver!" a young passenger in a hoodie shouted. "Careful with that guitar case." "Yes, sir," Richard muttered, keeping his head down. His back ached as he lifted the heavy bags. He once commanded a $300 million aircraft. He once watched sunrises over the Atlantic from the cockpit. Now he carried suitcases for people who didn't. Even look at him, Dodd. As he set the final bag down, a group of pilots walked past. Sovereign Airways uniforms, clean, confident. Richard froze. He recognized the captain. It was Timothy. Timothy had been promoted. The young first officer Richard once tried to bully now wore 4 stripes. Timothy slowed and looked at the shuttle driver. Standing in the rain. Their eyes met. Richard wanted to look away, but he couldn't. What he saw wasn't anger. It was pity. Timothy gave a small SAD nod, then turned and walked into the terminal. The automatic doors opened to welcome him back into a world Richard would never return to. "Hey, buddy, you want a tip or not?" the tourist in the hoodie called, waving $1. Richard turned back to the life he had created. He took the $1. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. "Have a safe flight." He climbed into the driver's seat of the rusted shuttle bus. Through the windshield, he watched a Boeing 737 rise into the gray sky, banking toward London. He watched until it disappeared, leaving him on the ground, exactly where he belonged. The story of Captain Richard Sterling is a reminder that authority is fragile. It is given by the public and maintained by trust. Richard believed his uniform made him untouchable. He believed his title gave him the right to judge others. In the end, it was his own judgment that grounded him. Marcus Hayes didn't win because of rank. He won because of something Richard never had. Humility. The Sterling Protocol remains a lasting lesson in aviation. The most dangerous turbulence isn't in the sky. It's in the mind of a pilot who forgets their humanity. Richard tried to remove people he thought were unfit, but life has a way of balancing the scales. In protecting his VIP world, he proved he was the only one who didn't belong.